Since early October, from the 7th or 8th of October, in fact, it appears to us that the world media is trying to sell us a delusion, a fantasy. And the fantasy is that history began, in a sense, on the 7th of October. History began that there was nothing before the 7th of October. And so, therefore, everything that Israel is doing is somehow justified. The issue of proportionality, disproportionality, how many deaths is okay, how many deaths is not okay, etc., etc. All of this conversation seems to obscure a fundamental truth about this situation, a truth that predates the 7th of October by 75 years at least. And that truth is that Israel is a colonial, white supremacist, apartheid state that is carrying out a genocide of the Palestinian people, not just in Gaza, but in fact, it wants to clear the entire area of historic Palestine of the Palestinians. Now, all of this is based on a foundational myth of the Israeli state, which is that Israel was founded in a land that had no people. And so, therefore, it was a nation for a people with no land, and that this land had no people. Now, this is a myth, of course, but it's a myth that has lived on in mainstream discourse in the Western media in particular in, um, in a very tenacious way. And a retelling of that myth, in a sense, is what we are hearing now from the 7th or 8th of October. Therefore, at Leftword Books, we've been very proud to publish Haider Eid's significant and brave and remarkable book, Decolonizing the Palestinian Mind, because what this book reminds us and tells us in great analytical detail is that history did not begin in 2023. It did not begin in 2014 or in the early 90s with the Oslo Accords, and so on and so forth. History has a way of going back. And uh, to talk about this book, to discuss the book in the light of what's been happening at the moment, I'm joined by Vijay Prashad, my colleague, my comrade at Leftword Books, who will tell us a little bit about the context of the book and also introduce our speakers. Vijay.
Very difficult situation in Palestine over the last several weeks. Latest reports coming have suggested that 9 out of 10 Palestinians in Gaza are suffering from acute hunger. There is just no food, there's no rice, very little bread. People are struggling to survive on whatever they can find. Meanwhile, the apartheid Israeli bombing in Gaza continues, bulldozers running through the West Bank city of Jenin. As Sudhanwa said, this attempt to ethnically cleanse Palestine of the Palestinians is not just happening in Gaza, it's happening in East Jerusalem and it's happening in the West Bank. During the early days of the bombardment on Gaza, I got a WhatsApp audio message from Professor Haider Eid. Professor Haider Eid teaches in Gaza. He's a professor of literature. Short while before this bombing had begun, maybe a year before, Haider Eid and Victoria Britton sent us a manuscript that he had written, which was called, even in that form, Decolonizing the Palestinian Mind. I'd been working on the manuscript slowly, but during the early days of the bombardment, When I got the message from Haider that he was still alive and he was struggling to survive with his wife and two daughters, um, fleeing from Gaza City, going towards Rafah, started working earnestly on the book, finished the book. Haider sent several WhatsApp audios as an introduction, a kind of opening statement for the book. Victoria Britton had already written a very fine preface to the book. And then the brilliant Palestinian painter Malek Matar painted a cover for us. We're so proud to have published Haider's book, Decolonizing the Palestinian Mind. Now, you must be wondering, where is Haider Eid and where is our discussant, Lina Miari from Birzeit University in Ramallah, Palestine? About 10 minutes before we were to start this webinar, Lina wrote to say that she had a family emergency and she had to rush from Ramallah to Haifa within the 1948 borders of Israel. And rushing from Ramallah to Haifa makes a mockery of the word rushing. For a Palestinian to leave the West Bank and try to enter 1948 Israel is by itself an ordeal. It is, in fact, designed by the apartheid Israeli state to make life so difficult for the Palestinians in the West Bank that they either flee or their frustrations overcome them and they resist and then are killed. This is ethnic cleansing at a tentacular level, neurological ethnic cleansing, as many people have called it. Lina, therefore, cannot join us. Another victim of apartheid Israel, unable to fulfill basic everyday tasks without having to confront the horrendousness of the occupation. Haider Eid was for many weeks in Rafah with his two daughters, young daughters, and his wife, struggling to survive. He happens to be a dual citizen, both of Palestine and of South Africa. And because he has South African papers, he was able to leave the country, take 28 hours, as you will hear just now, to get from Rafah to Cairo, Egypt, and has recently arrived in Johannesburg, South Africa. Rather than being able to join us for reasons that are understandable, very difficult to build a kind of normality when you've experienced such a traumatic experience that the Israelis have placed upon the Palestinian people, a kind of permanent Nakba, permanent attempt to ethnically cleanse, a permanent trauma. It's understandable that Haider couldn't join us right now. However, Haider has produced for us an extraordinary lecture on his book, which we're very happy to share with you. Um, After the lecture, Sudhanwa and I are going to return and have a conversation about the situation in Palestine today and about the book itself. So sit tight and enjoy from Haider Eid this video.
Uh, Let me start by thanking Leftword Books for organizing this launch and thanking my comrade Vijay Prashad, who has helped me actually publish this book and who has been offering tremendous help on the professional level excuse me, and on the personal level. I would also like to thank Professor Lina Miari for accepting to discuss the book. I'm sorry I can't join you live because I have just arrived in Johannesburg after a very arduous and tiring trip from Gaza through Egypt. It took us from Rafah to Cairo about 28 hours. It's a 5 hour trip, by the way, but it took us 28 hours. So I've been suffering from severe flu and cold symptoms, and I don't know what else. I just got the invitation for the book launch, which had already been organized before me leaving Rafah. But I had to accept the invitation and send this recorded contribution. And I want to talk about, we are discussing the book, but I also, and I know Vijay always insists that I talk about Gaza. And I know most of you want me to talk about experience in Gaza and the ongoing genocide. But let me, divide my contribution into two parts. The first part, I will talk about the book in general, since everybody, and I assume most of the people who are here are familiar with the book or are planning to get a copy. And so I want to start by talking about the book itself. Then I will talk a little bit about Gaza. And these two parts of my talk are interrelated, definitely. Gaza is an essential part of Palestine. And there's a genocide going on. Literally, there is a genocide going on. But I will talk about that later on. Let me start by talking about the book, which is in fact both personal and political. I think, since it is personal and political, I need to make it clear that it is also, my own testimony of being a Palestinian refugee residing in Gaza, or rather what has been called the largest open-air prison on earth. But I would also add that it's much more than an open-air prison. It has become an extermination, a death camp. But I am also conscious that I'm offering a sort of a voice from within, as a Palestinian, but also from Gaza, offering a way out of the man and woman-made quagmire in Palestine. My decision, in fact, to put together in a single book the articles and op-eds that I wrote and published during the Israeli onslaughts on Gaza, and during, I would say, the deadly medieval siege that has been imposed on Gaza since 2007. So yeah, everything here is inspired by, and I admit, by the images of the children. One image, for example, was that of Amara Abu Auf in 2021, raising a V victory sign while still being rescued from under the rubble. Al-Anqad, the rubble, the most hated word in Gaza right now, Anqad, rubble. So Amara Abu Auf was being rescued from under the rubble of a building in Al-Wahda Street, at the same time raising the victory sign. And different from white liberal mainstream ahistorical coverage of the unfolding genocide in Gaza, I will try to contextualize. Our life did not begin on the 7th of October 2023. Sorry, I haven't been able to sleep for the last 2 months. So I will try to contextualize and historicize the ongoing events. This is why actually the articles I have gathered here are sort of ordered in a way chronologically, but also politically, and vary in their take on the events in general. I mean, I don't need to say that I am an academic teaching literature and cultural studies at Al-Aqsa University in Gaza, but I'm also a BDS activist. I am an activist. I'm a BDS activist calling for the isolation of the only remaining apartheid regime on earth, apartheid Israel. And I also admit I'm conscious that these pieces have been affected by the works of the likes of Steve Biko, Franz Fanon, Aimé Césaire, Amilcar Cabral, and most certainly by the works of Ghassan Kanafani and Edward Said, among other towering intellectuals and activists, activists of our post-colonial world. But I also must add that, excuse me, I must add the impact also of my stay and studies in South Africa, post-apartheid South Africa, as one of the most inspiring experiences of my life as an oppressed Palestinian and an activist. Now, with the publication of Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem reports, and the ESCWA findings before them, not to mention the passing of the notorious ultra-racist nation-state law by the Israeli Knesset, Israel has been confirmed as an apartheid state. Now we need to move beyond this discussion now. I mean, it's an established fact. A settler, colonial, apartheid state. And like other settler colonial apartheid states, Israel thrives and survives on the dehumanization of, quote unquote, the barbarian native. Hence, what is happening right now in Gaza? Genocide. The point of decolonizing the mind is definitely not to offer the last word on what has been termed by right-wing politicians and some mainstream media outlets as, the Middle East conflict, the Gaza conflict, the Israel-Hamas conflict. And I have a problem with the word conflict, and I'm sure you understand why. You don't have two equal sides here. You have a colonizer and you have a colonized. You have an oppressor and you have oppressed. But rather, I am hoping to map out or to contribute to attempts of, mapping out a way out of the catastrophe created by apartheid Israel and provide a trajectory of personal and political involvement in the Palestinian struggle for freedom, liberation, and justice, self-determination. I have always been asking about, Edward Said talked about the necessity of, narrating our story. Where is the voice of Gazans? Voice of Palestinians? I mean, you turn on your TV, on CNN, on Fox News, etc. Where are the Palestinians? Why does mainstream media hide the fact that the overwhelming majority of us, for example, now in Gaza, are refugees ethnically cleansed for their villages and towns in 1948 by apartheid Israel? Why doesn't mainstream media mention the fact that 2/3, in fact, including myself, by the way, are refugees? We are portrayed as either villains or victims, but never human beings with full rights to freedom, never agents of change. Yet we are aware of the fact that we are the center of so much attention. But ironically, we are never heard from. We are not given the permission to narrate our own narrative, as Edward Said very eloquently put it. But let me go back, to the book itself. I mean, what do Palestinian activists and intellectuals, for example, think of the failed peace process? The ongoing Nakba, the ongoing genocide. What do we think about resistance? Different forms of resistance. Different and various forms of resistance. from BDS to popular resistance to even to the armed struggle. What do we think about that? What is a just solution to more than 75 years of dispossession? As international journalists and pundits and commentators speculate nowadays on the future prospects of peace between Israel and the Palestinians, by trying to answer, the question about, the future of Gaza, without asking Palestinians, by the way, without asking Palestinians. But many remain less than hopeful about this future due to Israel's continued disregard of our basic rights, our fundamental and basic rights, expansion of settlements and construction of the apartheid wall, the deadly blockade on Gaza, which is a crime against humanity, the Israeli nation-state law, the Abraham Accords, normalizations, BDS, etc., that is unfortunately never mentioned and on mainstream media. So this book, in a way, as you will notice, or as you have already noticed, is a collection of, as I said, analytical writings and reflections on the situation in general, on what is the eternal question, what is to be done. It tries to offer a futuristic vision, and it raises very critical questions, extremely critical questions about the so-called peace process, the Oslo Accords. And by the way, initially the title I myself chose, before discussing it with my friend who graciously accepted to write a prologue, Victoria Britain, my own title was De-Osloizing the Palestinian Mind. But then after discussions with my friend Victoria, we decided to title it as Decolonizing the Palestinian Mind. So it is composed, of several chapters. I am, based on my articles, I'm known, for being critical of the mainstream political ideology in the Middle East. So I try to offer a critical perspective, a critical futuristic vision. So in a way, the book tries, I'm not claiming that I have the final word here, tries to provide an in-depth look at how alternative political programs and struggles can offer prospects for a just peace. And because I wrote it while I was in Gaza, I hope that it manages to shed light on the myth of the peace process, peace industry, a critical look on Palestinian resistance strategies, including BDS, and the plausibility, the facade of the racist two-state solution. So in a way, it tries to examine the issue of Palestinian leadership, both pre and post 2006 Legislative Council elections. It also tries to address the transformation of Palestinian society after the formation of the PA, the Palestinian Authority, the lack of basic human rights, the violation of individual and collective rights, war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by apartheid Israel. So I think it's important to, while reading this book, to understand that there are that it never gives you the final word, but deals with the strategies for resisting the occupation. And in a way, it tries to shed light on the large-scale non-violent movement, which has included, hundreds of thousands of peaceful protests, but is virtually unheard of in the West. In a way, the book tries to discuss possibilities for peace within the context of Israel's continued blockade of Gaza, brutal regular onslaughts, including the current genocide. For example, internal conflict within Palestine between, for example, Hamas and Fatah, and steadfast refusal to discuss the Palestinian right of return, or rather, insistence on the right of return. Uh, Israel's oppression of the Palestinians is a form of apartheid and settler colonialism. Now, we need to agree on this in order to try to reach, a futuristic vision, beyond apartheid, beyond settler colonialism in Palestine. And therefore, there are questions to be raised. Is a one-state solution now becoming more likely? A secular democratic state for all of its citizens in historic Palestine? Now, Edward Said's political input will definitely, or is definitely, discussed in the book. And his approach to in a way, to understanding this new political reality, that between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, there is only one state, one apartheid state. So I'm conscious that I'm following Edward Said's call on Palestinian writers to narrate the Palestinian narrative, to insist on Palestinian agency. So I assume that I'm right when I say this is an authentic Palestinian voice. Of course, the book consists of several major sections. Political analysis of the situation right now, solutions offered, including, of course, Edward Said's proposal of a one-state solution. But, of course, his proposal was unfinished. He wrote a couple of articles in Al-Ahram Weekly. The one titled, I think, The Only Alternative, the other one, The One-State Solution. But he needed to work more on that. But unfortunately, he died before doing that. One section, for example, deals with the tools of struggle, including BDS and international solidarity. Another section is a sharp critique of the Oslo Accords and the peace industry, and the idea of disparticipation, not participating in the current political landscape in Palestine. And there is, a chapter arguing for that. So that was, just introducing my book, and I leave the discussion for, of course, Professor Lina and Comrade Vijay. But, and I know that you want to hear more about Gaza. And, until 4 days ago, when we were evacuated from Gaza by the South African embassies in Ramallah and in Cairo, we had been, I myself and 2.3 million Gazans living in the Gaza Strip, we had been living, and they are still living, sleepless nights under Israeli bombs. For when I left on almost the 60th day. But this time, honestly, the level of brutality is unprecedented. So what I mean by that, unlike what happened 2008, 2012, 2014, 2018, and 2021 massacres, this one taking place right now is a combination of ethnic cleansing. They want to get rid of, they want to force Gazans to move to the Sinai desert, but it's also a genocide. the gravest crimes against humanity. I mean, Israel has been committing since 1948 every single crime against humanity you can imagine, from ethnic cleansing to apartheid to direct military occupation to genocide now. But this genocide, former colonial powers are directly involved. The United States of America, imperialist America, the United Kingdom, France. The target of the current Israeli murderous campaign of bombardment against one of the most densely populated areas on earth has openly been children and women. I mean, since the beginning, I'm talking about, the beginning. When I say the beginning, I mean October 7th, 2023. Israel has flattened neighborhoods, including my own neighborhood. And I've been displaced, by the way, 4 times since October the 7th. Destroyed roads, bridges, residential towers brought down by apartheid Israel. UNRWA schools where, displaced people are taking refuge, and refugee camp houses on top of their owners, on top of the heads of their owners. The whole population has been denied access to water. We ended up drinking polluted water, dirty water. We had no electricity since day one, no medicine, no food. I myself, with my family, my little daughters, spent nights, with no food, hungry. And now, they've been asking, of course. I live in Gaza City itself. I moved from Gaza City to Sheikh Radwan in the north, and we were asked to move again. We moved to the south, to Rafah, etc. And now they are insisting again on the people of the towns of Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, Jabalia, who, by the way, those people have no functioning medical facilities due to apartheid Israel's targeting of their hospitals and clinics, and they have been insisting on these people to move to the south. Now, let me just tell you the figures, the numbers I got from the Ministry of Health. So far, 17,700 civilians have been killed, including 7,870 children and 6,120 women. Now, in order to add insult to injury, 7,000 people are still missing, including 4,500 children. Now, most of the missing are still under the rubble. Al-Anqad, again, the most hated word in Gaza. More than 2/3 of the population have been displaced. More than 2/3 of the population have been, just think about it. Calls for a long-lasting ceasefire have been rejected by Israel, and Israel's extreme right-wing government, fascist ministers, who vowed to launch more massive strikes and ground invasion in the hope of killing the largest possible number of Palestinians by targeting residential areas and refugee camps. And all of that is supported by the United States of America, which vetoed 2 resolutions calling for ceasefire at the Security Council of the United Nations. But there is a growing global pressure that has been decisive in forcing the US-Israel genocidal axis, to accept sometimes temporary suspensions. Sometimes only once they did it for 5 to 7 days, suspension of Israel's bombing of Gaza ghetto. And one problem, though, is that as with the previous truce initiatives, and the one that Israel accepted, that was my problem with the last truce, is that Israel and the Palestinians, that is to say, the colonizer and the colonized, the oppressor and the oppressed, are equated. As if you are dealing with two sides of the conflict. I mean, the Palestinian resistance is a legitimate resistance under international law, which is being put on the same level as a brutal, illegal occupation, apartheid, and settler colonialism. The fact that Israel has an actual army, disproportionately bigger firepower. I mean, it is said that Israel has one of the strongest armies in the world. Some people say the fourth strongest, others say the 10th, etc., etc. Strategic alliance with the United States of America. 200 planes full of weapons have been supplied from the United States of America to Israel since the beginning of the ongoing genocide. 200, you think about it. And what do Palestinians have? I don't want to discuss this. I think everybody knows. So there is, that stark difference also in the death toll. I mean, you think how many Palestinians have been killed, how many Israelis are, and most of the Israelis who have been killed are soldiers. Soldiers, definitely. As in the past, now Palestinians are expected to gratefully accept, a period of calm, not ceasefire, in order to release some Israeli prisoners. And at the same time, Israeli bombs are raining on their houses. And the blockade continues to strangulate Gaza. So in fact, what has come to be regularly required of the Palestinians is to conduct themselves as, the house Palestinians, obedient Palestinians. And that is the point of decolonizing, de-Osloizing the Palestinian minds. No, we are agents of change, with free will to choose what we want. And that is the point of my book. And but we are expected to be thankful to our white Ashkenazi masters for the breadcrumbs they let us have in order to barely survive, and say thank you, sir. And that is exactly what happened, what has been happening since 1993. And in fact, right from the beginning, we have been demonized, dehumanized, and the best that we were offered is, since 2007 until today, until the 7th of October, is a slow death within the confined walls of the Gaza concentration camp. In fact, Gaza is no longer a concentration camp. Gaza is a death camp. Gaza has become a graveyard. And contrary to what mainstream media wants everybody to believe, the hudna, or the truce that they are suggesting, and which took place in order to release some of the Israeli prisoners, temporary suspension, let's say, of airstrikes and bombing, does not lead to the immediate lifting of the blockade on the Gaza Strip and the reopening of the Rafah crossing 24/7 and all other crossings, of course, in a manner that allows the inflow of fuel, medicine, and all other basic goods. Neither does the truth include, provisions for ending Israeli occupation and apartheid? This is how we need to understand proposals, for truces, 5-day truce, 2-day truce, 3-day. No, no. Uh, what is suggested is rather a slight improvement in in living conditions under Israel's brutal war machine. In other words, it offers, a breathing space for 2.3 million human beings, so that they can bury their dead, drink a little bit of undrinkable water, and find some food and avoid starvation. Unfortunately, mainstream media and white liberal pundits insist on reiterating the same Zionist mantra that this is a conflict, whereas it's not a conflict, as I said, a conflict between a state and a hostile armed group. And what is being totally ignored is the fact that it is an occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid launched by a settler colonial power that seeks to ethnically cleanse an entire indigenous population in order to solidify and legitimize its colony. That is what it is. Now, worse still, like all other settler colonies, apartheid Israel's aim is to get rid of the indigenous Palestinians altogether. That is the aim of the ongoing onslaught, bloodbath taking place right now in Gaza. And what is ignored is the context within which the Gaza genocide is being perpetrated. That's my point. That the Israeli wrath, anger inflicted on us Palestinian refugees of Gaza comes within an ideological context of tribal bigotry, fascism, racism, exclusivism, you name it. Israel's stated goal of annihilating Palestinians to manage the demographic threat, quote unquote, and to maintain calm by what they call mowing the lawn. Yeah, in other words, killing as many Palestinians as possible in order to reduce the threat of the demographic bomb. This strategy has been maintained since its alleged withdrawal from Gaza in 2005. And I think this is why more mobilization and grassroots pressure on apartheid Israel, but also on criminal, genocidal Western governments is necessary. On what we can do, we can exert pressure on the colonial West to impose a military embargo. That is what is needed right now. We need a ceasefire. We need to boycott apartheid Israel and to impose a military embargo. In addition to the allowance of the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. We need the support of ordinary people. We need, as I said, immediate ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and we need protection, UN protection of Palestinians of Gaza. I hope, by talking about Gaza, I've given you an idea about what is going on right now in Palestine, in Gaza, within the context of Israel's settler colonialism and apartheid. And this is exactly what the book is about. And what is the solution? People keep talking about, what's the solution for Gaza? Well, the question is, what is the solution for Palestine? What is next? And what is next is not is not a repetition of the same mantra, the facade of the two-state solution, the racist two-state solution, bringing the two sides together to the negotiating table. This is nonsense. What is needed is, our right to self-determination, freedom, equality, justice. And I personally think, and this is my argument in the book, that can only happen within, a secular democratic state, a state for all of its citizens, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, etc., etc. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy reading the book.
Well, even though Professor Haider Eid is not here with us right now live, but a big thanks to him. Um, we published a number of books on Palestine in the past. You can go to the Leftword website and check out our Palestine reading list. But this has been a really special book. Also because I don't recall any other book that we published, whether on Palestine or any other subject, where in the act of publishing the book, one had one's heart in one's mouth. One did not know the fate of the author of the book. And so therefore, personally for me, as somebody who worked on the book, personally for me, it's deeply moving to see Professor Haider Eid safe, with his family. And it's also very moving and very inspiring to hear him speak at such length with such calm, but also such calm determination, and analyze a very complex situation so neatly and so simply. Um, I'd like to bring in Vijay now into this conversation. Vijay, you and I have both at different points traveled to Palestine. You've seen what it's like, I've seen what it's like. And, strictly speaking, it's unimaginable for people who've not been to Palestine uh, to imagine the daily reality of what it means to be in Palestine, whether you're talking about the West Bank or Jerusalem or Gaza. Now, I've not visited Gaza ever, but one has read enough, and I have visited Jerusalem and the West Bank, and that does give you some sense of what it might be in Gaza. But currently, what's happening in Gaza is just beyond all comprehension in a sense. Um, but what I wanted to talk to you about was that it seems to me, at least, sitting in India, it seems to me that never has there been such a big gap, such a big gulf between the governments of the West and the people of those countries. Never have we seen such large demonstrations in support of Palestine in the US, in UK, in Germany, Canada, and so on and so forth. Uh, do you feel, as somebody who's very familiar with these countries, you're currently in the US yourself, do you feel that this is an inflection point in a sense? Things have turned?
Well, firstly, I mean, the bombardment is itself just remarkable. I mean, I've covered this conflict, been to Gaza after the bombing of 2014, Operation Permanent Resolve. That's what the Israelis called it. You could even then see the remains of Operation Cast Lead, 2008. It's incredible. Ever since Gaza had an election which elected Hamas to govern this part of Palestine, this part of the occupied Palestinian territory. Ever since then, the Israelis have almost annually bombed Gaza, and viciously, bombing infrastructure, bombing neighborhoods, refugee camps, bombing UN facilities. It's incredible. But this time, the bombing seems even fiercer. That's what's extraordinary. They first bombed the north, Gaza City in particular, Jabalia refugee camp, other refugee camps. Then the bombing started moving south. There's a road that divides Gaza, Salhadin Street. They crossed Salhadin Street. There were Israeli tanks on that road. started bombing the city of Khan Yunis, the second largest city in Gaza, pummeled Khan Yunis. In fact, it was extraordinary because just before they'd said that go south of Saladin Street and that's a safe zone. Not so. Khan Yunis, by the way, is the base of Hamas. That's where Hamas emerged in 1987, not in Gaza City. Pummeled Khan Yunis. Then went even further south towards the Rafah border crossing, which had already been bombed 3 times in the first couple of weeks. And they started bombing Rafah. That's the journey that Haider Eid makes. The visuals from that bombing, the killing of almost 100 Palestinian journalists, the attacks on medical personnel, hospitals, ambulances, the attacks on schools, in fact, the attacks on children, 17,000 odd Palestinians killed, but perhaps half of them children. All of this has certainly entered the conversation in Western countries. I mean, it's not that you need to have an argument with people when they see the numbers, when they see the targets, hospitals, schools, etc., makes people heartsick. When they see their governments continue to defend Israel and also arm Israel, when they continue to arm Israel right up to the present, when the United States vetoes a resolution for a ceasefire, all of this has really turned the corner for hundreds of millions of people who live in the West. It also has something to do with the fact that the Palestinian youth movement in places like the United States have made themselves a mass movement. Now, the backlash against all this is that old word anti Semitism. Anti Semitism is a real problem. It was a European problem. It's Europe's hatred of its indigenous Jewish population, whether in Poland, Tsarist Russia, France, and so on. This is a European problem. But now critics of Israel are being attacked for being anti Semitic, a way to, in a way, shut down these protests. But it's not working, Sudanwa, because as more and more hundreds of people are killed a day, and mostly civilians, by the way, hundreds of people, that feeling of demoralization has turned to anger, not only in Western countries, but around the world. 2 million people in the streets of Jakarta in a protest, million people in the streets of Istanbul, protests in Kerala, in India. The Indian government has been appalling on this, but large sections of the Indian people heartsick at the level of brutality.
Uh, it's interesting, I mean, sitting in India, you and I were both kids when, in the early 80s, Yasser Arafat came to India for the NAM conference. You'll remember he hugged Indira Gandhi, called her his sister. When Indira Gandhi was killed, he came again, stood throughout the entire cremation process, saluted her, and so on. So there's a lot of affection that we in India have had towards Yasser Arafat and the PLO and so on. But at the same time, it's also true that the so-called peace process of Oslo was, in a sense, a compromise. And one of the things that I find very enlightening about Haider Eid's book is that in the tradition of Edward Said, he actually sort of takes apart that whole peace process argument. How do you see it?
Well, what's interesting is Edward Said, at the time of the Oslo Agreement in 1993-94, when the Soviet Union had collapsed, the Third World was in the middle of a major debt crisis, globalization was on the table. Edward Said called the Oslo process not a compromise, but a surrender. He said that the Palestinian resistance has surrendered in front of Israel. They've, in fact, taken on a job of maintaining and containing the Palestinian resistance within the Palestinian Authority. Very strong statement. He called it the Palestinian Versailles, the city in France where the surrender took place from the Great War. A very strong statement from Edward Said. In fact, that statement is the starting point of Haider Eid's book. Haider Eid has a very interesting section in this book. And by the way, he's being extremely humble when he says it's a collection of articles. It's a sustained narrative. It's a driving narrative about the fact that Oslo was a surrender, and that out of Oslo, the two-state solution was a mirage meant to contain Palestinian ambitions as the Israelis ate into the surrendered portion of Palestine that had been accepted. Israel basically has already annexed East Jerusalem. They are all the way towards annexing the West Bank. They've taken over large parts of the most arable land, the water sources, making life for the Palestinians miserable. And in Gaza, they are basically conducting what Israeli officials have called the second Nakba. In fact, Nakba being the word for the first ethnic cleansing in 1948, the word coined by the Lebanese historian Constantine Zorayak. It means catastrophe. In fact, Ilyas Khoury, a Lebanese writer, said there's never really been a Nakba. There's a process called a permanent Nakba, permanent ethnic cleansing. And that's what we are seeing now in Gaza. So Haider Eid from this comes to the point that the only rational solution is a so-called one-state solution from the Jordan River, the border with Jordan, till the Mediterranean Sea, have a one-state where Palestinians and Israelis live with equal rights. This is, of course, a position that should be taken quite seriously because it's actually the position of most modern states where people who live in a territory are given equal rights. In fact, in Israel, that does not apply. Israel has a two citizenship policy. One is for Jews and the other is for anybody else. So Israel, baked into its cake, is an apartheid state. They are unwilling to accept the one state solution. They are not willing to accept the two-state solution. So right now, as the bulldozers move into Jenin in the West Bank, and as the bulldozers push towards Rafah, moving the Palestinians into smaller and smaller enclaves, it seems that the Israelis are now believing in the no-state solution. No state for the Palestinians. Wipe them out. Haider Eid's book is a cry against the no state solution. It is a demand for a one state solution. It suggests that if you don't take these serious issues, in hand, you're going to see the annihilation of the Palestinian people. It's a really important, not only cry from the heart, but an analytical study. And that comes across in the statement he just made. Here is a man who's just experienced the most traumatic bombardment after a series of historical bombardments going back at least to Cast Lead 2008. And yet, here he is, gives us an analysis of the highest quality about the situation, not just on the empirical level, this happened, that happened, and so on, although he does reflect on some of that, but he gives us a theoretical look at what are the possibilities. And indeed, his theoretical assessment in decolonizing the Palestinian mind is that the only way forward is to advance a one state solution. It's a very powerful book, and I hope it's read by tens of millions of people. I don't think this is a book, Sudhu, where we want to have 20 readers or 30 readers. We want tens of millions of people to engage this book. I'm very glad to say that it's coming out in several languages already from Manifest Libres in Barcelona. It's out in Spanish and Catalan. It's going to come out in a series of languages. I'm very happy that we at Leftword have been able to produce this book so quickly, get a great cover from Malak Matar, and get it into as many languages as possible through the International Union of Left Publishers. I mean, it's really important. For people who don't understand the structure of something like the International Union of Left Publishers, a union of about 40 publishers around the world, is that when a book like this comes, the kind of importance of this book in this political context, we don't have to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair to find people to take it to translate. We just write to our comrades in this network, and people say, I will do it. I will spend the next 72 hours translating this book into Tagalog, into Indonesian, into Korean, into whatever. I'm going to do it. It's an act of political will. I'm very proud that we've been able to do this, so to get the book out so fast. The Leftword team has been amazing. Everybody has been amazing in the Leftword team, working basically from dawn to dusk to get this book out. In some cases, not even sleeping. So it's from dawn to dawn. But I'm really proud of our team for what they've done, and I'm proud of the International Union of Leftword for getting this book out there. And Simon Vasquez of Manifest Libres got it done like this.
And I would urge our listeners today to go to the Leftword website. The book is available there. We ship all over India, but not just in India. We ship all over the world. So please get your copy. It's a terrific book. It's a book that Vijay, myself, Purbasha, Shubhendu, all of us at Leftword are very, very proud of having published. I also just want to remind our listeners, there's a way in which the entire media discourse around this is like anybody who stands up against Israel, especially at the current moment, is painted as a Hamas apologist. And I want to emphasize this that Haidar Eid is none of that. Haidar Eid is a Marxist, he's a scholar, he's an activist, he is an activist of the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement, which is a 100% non violent, peaceful movement. It, in fact, draws inspiration from India's own anti colonial struggle. For us in India, the Palestinian struggle goes right to our heart, not just because it's anti colonial, but also because the histories of partition are also, in a sense, shared.
Mhm.
India was partitioned in 1947, Palestine was partitioned in 1948. We won independence and got partitioned. Palestine got partitioned and lost independence.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, there is a lot of connect between Indians and Palestinians. We know, Vijay and I know, anytime you go to Palestine and if you say that you're from India, the kind of affection that you get on the streets from ordinary people is just incredible and heartwarming. And this is the moment when, in particular, I'm talking to our listeners in India, but also all over the world. We have to join protest movements. We have to shame our governments into taking a stronger anti Israel stand. We have to shame them, force them into a military embargo of Israel, as Haider Eid said. Uh, all of that can only happen through mass mobilizations on the streets, on the ground. I'd like to thank Haider Eid for having sent this incredible video in very, very trying circumstances. Uh, as you could see, he was sleep deprived. He's not been well. He's been through the most traumatic 60 days of his life, I'm sure. And in that situation, to have produced this video is an act of incredible courage and what the Palestinians consider, in a sense, their national characteristic, which is sumud, steadfastness. This idea that we are here and we are not going to go away anywhere. I'd once again invite all of you to go to the Leftword website, leftword.com, and get your copy of Decolonizing the Palestinian Mind by Haider Eid. I thank all of you who joined us today. Thank you.